Well, welcome back. Our next guest, I think you'll hear share with us today his story. I think you'll find him to be extremely fascinating. Dr. Robert Rittenhouse is with us. He's an adoptive father, retired university professor and missionary worker with a PhD in cognitive psychology and deafness from the University of Illinois. That just kind of gives a background of the story that you're about to hear, the story of a deaf Honduran orphan. And Dr. Rittenhouse, nice to have you today. Where's your pooch? It was laying on the ground there the other day.
I banned him to the bedroom, but he's on the bed, so he's very comfortable.
No, we love dogs. We like dogs around here.
Yeah, I'm a dog lover myself.
All right, nice to have you with us today. Fascinating story. Why did you go to Honduras in the first place?
Well, actually, my wife made the first trip. A friend of hers from church invited her to go, and they were ostensibly going to help some doctors and dentists there for a week. Our church in Little Rock, Arkansas, where we lived at the time, was heavily invested in Honduras. And so Pat went. My wife's name is Pat, and she's a teacher of the deaf, and she is deaf herself, although you wouldn't know it to talk to her. Her speech is essentially normal. She's a good lip reader, but she's a teacher of the deaf herself. And while she was there, word got out that a deaf woman, highly educated deaf woman who was a teacher, was in Tegucigalpa, the capital. And it just so happened, anyway, I'll phrase it that way, and later we'll get into maybe my belief that there are very few coincidences in life. It just so happened that the son of the former president of the country was starting an orphanage, and he wanted to include deaf children in that orphanage because of some Bible reading that he had done. Wow. And so the two of them got together, and he wanted to pick Pat's brains about teaching and how to communicate with the deaf. And as they were departing, going their separate ways, Pat said, "By the way, my husband and I would like to adopt a deaf child." And that's kind of how the story got started. I'm not sure what would have happened had Pat never said anything to Carlos about wanting to adopt.
So were you really down there to look for a child to adopt?
No, it was just something that came out of her mouth as they were departing. I was a university professor. I was back in Arkansas, and when word got back to me, and my dean found out about this, she sent me down there to do workshops for teachers. So I followed Pat down 3-4 months later, and that's when I met Nori. Pat came back and said, "Boy, I found a little girl I think we should adopt." And I had just become a grandfather at the time, so I, given my sort of linear thinking, I guess, at the time, I didn't think that's the way it worked. So I was a little bit of a hard sell on that idea, but my dean was convinced that this was a good thing to do, so she sent me down to Honduras. Wow. And I fell in love with Nori and all the kids down there.
Well, tell us about your first meeting with Nori, the one you end up adopting.
The first meeting was at the mission house in Tegucigalpa, which was actually the former mansion of the president's family. Carlos had leased it to this World Gospel Outreach organization. And Nori came over, 9:30 that night. Carlos brought her over, and I sat down with her. She didn't have any language skills. She didn't have the ability to communicate using English or sign language. She sort of had developed a gesture system. So we played a game, and you could tell right away. My background is in psychology and teaching. Are we still on?
Yes. Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, my screen went blank. And but anyway, we sat down and played a game, and I could tell she was really a bright child and just a beautiful little girl. That was our first meeting, and that cinched the deal right there. I said, we've got to try to get this little girl back to the States, because she had been orphaned, and all the kids were going to school, and Nori was school age, but she was out playing in the streets because they really didn't have education services there for deaf children.
How long did it take you to get her into the States?
It took about 3 months to get her into the States. We kind of came through the back door, so to speak, but we got her to Little Rock 2 days before school was to start.
Wow. What are some of the conditions of the orphanages there in Honduras?
Actually, pretty good there in Tegucigalpa. Tegucigalpa is probably, it's the capital. It's probably the city most able to provide human resource services. So the orphanage that Nori was in was really a pretty nice orphanage. All the girls were quite a bit older than Nori, so they had taken her.
How old was she?
She was 7 at the time.
Okay.
And most of the girls in the orphanage were probably between 12 and 18. Mm-hmm. And they took real good care of Nori.
That's good. Was she a believer when you first met her?
No, she really didn't know anything about the Bible, about God, Jesus, any of those kinds of things. But she really took. We would pray every night with her, and once she developed, I'll probably choke up a little bit on this because I can see the image so well. Yeah. Back in those days, but as she developed communication skills, she would say what my wife called the A through Z prayers, and sometimes they'd last for an hour. And she became a believer over time. Wow.
Now, how has your life been impacted through all of this? I mean, this is quite a story.
Well, it does give you a new perspective. That's for sure. I had to be literally pushed into this by my wife, but it's probably the best decision I was ever forced to make, and I'm so glad I did it.
At the time you're adopting this 7-year-old from Honduras, your grandfather, how did your children and adult children take to you adopting Nori?
Actually, pretty well. I come from a farm family, so we're fairly traditional. There had been no adoption in either Pat's family or mine, but they took to it real well. I think it's the kind of thing they would expect from me. I've kind of gone and done my own thing in life, and kind of like to take chances and risks, and so they took to it. And of course, she's such a sweet little girl, not so little anymore, but they just fell in love with Nori just as we did. But she really has changed. She changed my perspective. I, as a university professor, was really heavily involved in my work, and when she came along, it caused me to reprioritize things.
Wow. What are you doing now?
Right now, I'm retired. I do some consulting work. I volunteer 1 day a week down at the sheriff's office doing well-being checks on senior citizens. And then once you've worked with the deaf as long as I have, well, you become a part of their community. So with my sign language skills, I'm called on to help them with problems that they encounter from time to time.
What's Nori's future? What does she want to do?
Well, right now, she's doing her senior internship at the New Mexico School for the Deaf. She started about 2 weeks ago, and she'll graduate from Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. this coming May. Wow. It's considered the Harvard of the deaf. It's known all over the world. And then she hopes to, her major is child and family studies, and she hopes to work with families of young deaf children.
Wow, what a story. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah, I'd do it again times 5. There was a boy named Gustavo, and he was orphaned too, and we wanted to, and that's one regret we have. We didn't adopt them both, but we thought the adoption would go pretty smoothly. It didn't. Yeah. We wanted to adopt Gustavo as well, but we didn't get to do that. But, oh, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Absolutely.
All right. Where do people get a copy of your story?
Well, probably the best place is to go to Author House, the publisher of the book. All the book royalties go to the Happy Hands School for the Deaf in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and And if you buy the book from the author house, the publishing company, why greater royalties are generated, but you can also get it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Wow, okay. It's called Nori, the story of a deaf Honduran orphan. And, you know, Dr. Rittenhouse, you remind me of something I say often on the air. Whatever God saves you from, brings you through, he turns you around and makes you a minister too. That's clearly the case.
Well, you can bet that his hands were on this entire process. And if we had time, in fact, I encourage people to read the book. You'll see how timing and people and events just couldn't have happened by chance. There's a very good website. It's www.thegoodnessofgod.us, and it's a place to go. With the agreement I have with the publishing company, I have to write a blog entry once a week, so there's a good blog there and some other material in the book.
Thegoodnessofgod.us.
Correct.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your story. This is fascinating. Down the road, could you help us interview Nori?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's try to set that up. I'd like to do that.
All right. There's a technology available where you, Perry, and Nori could talk directly to each other, even though she communicates in sign language. You wouldn't even need me to be involved in it.
All right. We'll look into that. Thank you, Dr. Rittenhouse. God bless you, my friend. Nice to see you.
All right. God bless you too, Perry. Thank you.
Okay. We'll see you. We'll be right back.